Welcome to my world history notes, where I'm sharing with you things I'm learning about the Cold War after World War II and during, and a little bit before. But the Cold War in particular, and stuff that some of the stuff I already knew, some of the stuff I'm just finding out. It's very superficial, right on the surface. You'll have to go into more detail if you're interested. Right now, I'm just trying to understand some connections between then and now. So each time I do this, I like to present, say, a communist, a Soviet agent, a communist sympathizer, or somebody on the opposite side, and just discuss their influence and a little bit of what they did. Then you can go and look further if you're interested. Now, today, I want to talk about somebody who really was important to me as far as his work um, when I was young, and he was a writer, and he had a lot of influence, cultural influence. Um, and his name was John Steinbeck. Now, you might remember John Steinbeck. He won the 1962 Nobel Prize in Literature. A great writer. During the era of the 30s and the 40s, he wrote things like East of Eden, Of Mice and Men, the Pulitzer Prize winning The Grapes of Wrath in 1939, and that's considered his masterpiece. And it's just these are important works. Now, the important thing to understand is during this time that he wrote these great works, he was a leftist. Now, I don't think he was an outright communist, but he was definitely a sympathizer of the communist ideals, and he associated with leftist authors and labor unions, and he joined the League of American Writers, which was a communist front organization in 1935. He was mentored by uh, communist sympathizing radicals, communist Lincoln Steffens, Ella Winter, and through Francis Whitaker, who was a member of the Communist Party USA's John Reed Club for Writers. He met with, that's when he met with union organizers and such, and he wrote a letter in support, or he signed a letter in support of the Soviet invasion of Finland and the Soviet established puppet government. Now, later, after he wrote these works, which were now I have to go back and reread them and look for what the threads in there that would be pro-communist, that would be trying to first off disparage capitalism, to say that people's sufferings or problems were caused by capitalism. We'll have to look at that. I haven't, since I found this out, I haven't gone back and reread, but I should, and I think I will, because these books are really good. They're well written, classics. And The Grapes of Wrath was made into a movie, and Henry Fonda, another interesting leftist, was the star. So very interesting stuff. But the important thing to remember is that the CIA released in 2012 that Steinbeck did offer his services to the agency in 1952. So he probably had changed his mind about a few things by what he saw. We don't know what he did for the CIA during the Cold War, if he did anything at all. Um, but he was he supported. It's kind of contradictory. He supported Arthur Miller when Arthur Miller, the playwright, refused to name names to the House and Un-American Activities Committee trials. Steinbeck had referred to that time as a very strange and frightening time. In '63, he visited the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic for John Kennedy. He was sympathetic to the U.S. Army, and he was denounced by his leftist friends. He was a friend of Lyndon Johnson, and things like. And he had a son in Vietnam, but so it looks like, what it looks like is that Steinbeck started out as a leftist, and his greatest works were written as a leftist. Okay, communist sympathizer, and so you want to think about the influences that they would have on you that would be supportive of. They don't have to be like even mention the word communism or socialism. They just have to be. You have to look at these literary and movie things where are they disparaging the free market capitalism as being the source of evil, or as being the cause of our problems? Are they uplifting socialist ideals um, that that negate traditional morality, traditional religion? So, and the worth of the individual and self-reliance and things like that. So, very interesting person, John Steinbeck, a brilliant writer, um, brilliant depictions of his works and made into movies. Grapes of Wrath is considered one of the 75 books that is the American literary canon that we should read. So just to stop with that, and just hopefully you'll be interested in looking at the journey that Steinbeck made from leftist to patriot. So go back to our timeline. Um, and we have in August 18th, 1945, the Soviet invasion of the Kuril Islands began against the Japanese, opening with the Battle of Sumshu. And then the Soviet assault on the 19th on Majorca began. These were also islands off the Soviet Union and between them and Japan. And um, and then a very interesting thing happened on August the 21st, 1945. President Truman ordered that Lend-Lease aid be halted immediately. Now, what's known as lend-lease now is usually thought of in history in association with Britain's war efforts, and it's rarely thought of as the program FDR sold to Congress as a means to keep America out of the Second World War. The idea of helping Britain and the Soviet Union with material. Um, and that our lend-lease program was crucial to the Soviet Union's World War II victory over Hitler's Germany because of what we could provide them with material effort. But FDR gave lend-lease aid to Russia, gave it a priority that superseded all Allied military needs, including American military needs. The lend-lease program provided much more than war supplies to the USSR. There was massive amounts of post-war supplies, which became Soviet Cold War supplies. And they were thrown in with this deal. And that supplies included the materials that went into making an atom bomb, chemicals, metals, and minerals, up to and including uranium. So after Hitler invaded the USSR in June 1941, U.S. war supplies flowed to the Soviet Union as well as Britain, despite American hostility to communism. So just think of what I've told you about the amount of Soviet influence and outright Stalinist agents in our government at the time. And just think of this benefit to the Soviet Union to set them up to fight the Cold War. And one of my points of this whole series is going to be that the United States government prolonged the Cold War. The Soviet Union would not have been the adversary that they became were they not propped up by our support, because communist governments, socialist governments just simply cannot produce. They can only take. So all echelons of the US government were riddled with Moscow loyal agents and fellow travelers, and I mean all echelons, all levels. War supplies didn't just flow to the Soviet Union, they flooded it. Over 500,000 trucks and jeeps, nearly $1 billion worth of 1940s dollars of ordnance, ammunition, thousands of fighter aircraft, bombers, tanks, 13 million pairs of winter boots, 1.7 million tons of petroleum products, a merchant fleet, 1,000 steam locomotives, 581 naval vessels including minesweepers, landing craft, submarine chasers, frigates, torpedo boats, floating docks, pontoon barges, river tugs, and a light cruiser. And you can get that you can read, I've already talked about George Racy Jordan from Major Jordan's Diaries. And also you can read John R. Dean's The Strange Alliance, the story of our efforts at wartime cooperation with Russia. So it's important to understand there were also icebreakers, which were essential to keep northernmost ports of the Gulag archipelago supplied with fresh slaves, another lost fact. And that you can see that in Martin Bollinger's Stalin's Slave Ships, Kolyma and the Gulag Fleet, and the Role of the West. That's from the Naval Institute Press. So the American Lend-Lease didn't just keep the Soviet police state humming along internally either. Nikita Khrushchev would say to Life magazine in 1970, for those 500,000 trucks and Jeeps, and a quote, this is a quote from that Life magazine, just imagine how we would have advanced from Stalingrad to Berlin without them. So what Khrushchev was saying is that without all those American wheels, the Soviets wouldn't have been able to advance the 1,400 miles from Stalingrad to Berlin, occupying the nations of Eastern Europe in between for the next 4.5 decades. So it's very important to understand that was just the beginning of what we did to help them. There will be a lot of other things that I will point out if I live long enough, if I have time to, to show you what I found, because it's fascinating stuff. It's almost infuriating stuff too. So we'll stop there. I'm going to discuss another Chinese battle coming up, another communist victory, and then the Clement Attlee's announcement about Lend-Lease after Truman canceled it. So thank you for listening. I hope you'll study this stuff and come to your own conclusions and see that the Cold War is an extremely fascinating time in our history to study. Take care.